It all started with a simple task, a routine assignment, really. My job was straightforward: survey an old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The place had been empty for decades, and the city had finally decided to auction it off. But first, they needed someone to go in, take notes, and confirm that the structure was still sound. Easy enough, right? The mansion, known as the Wentworth House, sat at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, shrouded in dense woods that seemed to press in from all sides. The place had a reputation, of course. Every town has its haunted house, and Wentworth House was ours. Kids dared each other to sneak up to the front porch, tap on the windows, or even break in. But no one ever stayed long. There were too many stories. Stories of people disappearing, of strange noises in the night, of lights flickering in the windows when no one was there. But I wasn't a kid. I was a professional, and I didn't believe in ghosts. The day was overcast as I approached the house, a heavy sky that threatened rain. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled. The mansion itself was a towering Gothic structure, with turrets and spires that reached up into the gray sky. The windows were dark, the glass cracked and fogged with age, and the front door hung slightly ajar, as if beckoning me inside. I parked my car at the end of the driveway and grabbed my flashlight, my camera, and my notepad. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves as I made my way up the steps to the front porch. The wood creaked under my weight, and I hesitated for just a moment before pushing the door open. The interior was dark and musty, with a thick layer of dust covering every surface. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of old wood and mildew. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom, revealing a grand staircase that curved up to the second floor. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floors were covered in faded, moth-eaten rugs. I took a deep breath and started my survey, moving from room to room, making notes on the condition of the floors, the walls, the ceilings. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, and the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere deep within the walls. As I moved through the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows that flitted across the walls, shapes that seemed to shift and change when I looked directly at them. But every time I turned to look, there was nothing there, just empty rooms and darkened hallways. I told myself it was just the atmosphere, the stories getting to me. But the feeling persisted, a gnawing unease that settled in the pit of my stomach and refused to leave. I was in the dining room, examining the ornate fireplace when I heard it, a faint sound just on the edge of hearing. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping like someone was knocking on a distant door. I froze, straining to listen, but the sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I shook my head, trying to dispel the creeping sense of dread that was beginning to take hold. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. There was nothing here, nothing but an old, empty house and a lot of bad memories. I moved on, heading up the grand staircase to the second floor. The steps groaned under my weight, and the air grew colder as I ascended. The hallway at the top of the stairs was long and narrow, lined with closed doors that led to the various bedrooms. I chose the first door on the right and pushed it open. The room was small, with a single bed pushed up against one wall and a large window that looked out over the front yard. The furniture was old and worn, the mattress sagging in the middle, the curtains tattered and faded. I crossed the room to the window and peered out. The sky had darkened, and the first drops of rain were starting to fall, spattering against the glass. I turned back to the room, intending to finish my survey and move on to the next room, but I stopped short. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier, thicker, like I was walking through water. And then I heard it again, the tapping sound, louder this time, coming from directly behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, the door swinging slightly on its hinges. My heart was pounding in my chest now, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I could feel the panic rising, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I needed to get out of this room, out of this house. I backed towards the door, keeping my flashlight trained on the spot where the sound had come from. but as I reached the doorway, the door suddenly slammed shut, the force of it nearly knocking me off my feet. I was trapped. I grabbed the doorknob, yanking it with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. It was like the door had been welded shut. I was starting to hyperventilate now, the walls of the room closing in on me, the darkness pressing down like a physical weight. And then, in the silence, I heard a voice. It was soft, barely more than a whisper, but it was there, coming from the walls, from the floor, from the very air around me. "Get out." The word sent a jolt of terror through me, and I redoubled my efforts to open the door, pounding on it with my fists, screaming for help. But the door remained stubbornly closed, the room echoing with the sound of my desperate cries. And then, just as suddenly as it had slammed shut, the door swung open, sending me sprawling into the hallway. I scrambled to my feet, my flashlight clattering to the floor, and bolted down the stairs, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until I was outside, the cold rain soaking through my clothes, my heart still hammering in my chest. I stumbled to my car, fumbling with the keys, and drove away from the house as fast as I could, not stopping until I was back in town, surrounded by the reassuring lights of civilization. I tried to tell myself that it had all been in my head, that I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong with that house. Something dark and malevolent, something that didn't want me there. I never went back to Wentworth House. I handed in my report to the city, leaving out the details of what had happened. I couldn't explain it, and I knew no one would believe me if I tried. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls outside my window and the shadows seem to move on their own, I can still hear that voice, whispering in the darkness. Weeks passed, but the memory of that day lingered. It haunted my sleep, twisting my dreams into nightmares. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, with the sound of that whispered warning echoing in my ears. Get out. I tried to brush it off, to move on with my life, but Wentworth House had a hold on me. A dark, icy grip that refused to let go. I began researching the mansion's history, driven by a need to understand what I'd experienced. There were rumors, of course, whispers of occult practices, of strange rituals conducted within its walls. But they were just that. Rumors. Nothing concrete, nothing I could put my finger on. The more I dug, the more I found myself drawn back to the house. It was like an obsession, a pull that grew stronger with each passing day. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was left unfinished, that I needed to go back and confront whatever it was that had driven me out. One particularly cold and rainy evening, I made up my mind. Armed with a stronger flashlight, a camera, and a resolve bolstered by a few stiff drinks, I drove back to the mansion. The rain lashed at my windshield as I navigated the winding roads that led to the outskirts of town. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the sky was dark, the moon obscured by thick clouds. When I arrived, the mansion loomed before me, more menacing than I remembered. The trees seemed to huddle closer, their branches reaching out like twisted claws. I parked the car and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. The rain pounded on the roof of the car, a constant, rhythmic drumming that only added to the tension building in my chest. Finally, I stepped out, pulling my jacket tight against the wind and rain, and made my way up the driveway. The front door was still slightly ajar, just as I had left it. I hesitated at the threshold, memories of the last visit flooding my mind, but I forced myself to step inside. The air was colder this time, and the musty smell was stronger, more oppressive. I switched on my flashlight and began my exploration, moving cautiously from room to room. The house seemed even darker than before, the shadows deeper, more threatening. I climbed the staircase again, each step echoing through the empty house. The door to the small bedroom was closed, but this time I was ready. I pushed it open, half expecting it to slam shut again, but it stayed open, the darkness inside impenetrable. I stepped into the room, shining my flashlight around. It looked the same as before, old, decaying, lifeless. But there was something different in the air, a tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And then, I heard it. The tapping sound, louder than before, coming from the walls. I turned, my flashlight sweeping the room, but there was nothing there. The sound grew louder, more insistent, as if something was trying to get out. My breath quickened, and I felt that familiar panic rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to run this time. I was going to face whatever was haunting this place once and for all. The tapping grew louder still, now accompanied by a low, guttural moaning. The walls seemed to vibrate with the sound, and I could feel the floorboards beneath my feet trembling. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. I backed out of the room, my flashlight flickering as I moved down the hallway. The tapping followed me, growing more frantic, more desperate. And then I heard the voice again, but this time it was different. It wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. "Get out!" The words echoed through the house, shaking the walls, reverberating through the floorboards. The force of it nearly knocked me off my feet, and I stumbled down the stairs, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering down the steps. I was halfway to the front door when I felt something cold brush against my arm. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The air around me felt thick, like I was wading through water, and I could feel the cold pressing in from all sides. "Get out," the voice repeated. Softer this time, almost pleading. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the door, flinging it open and nearly falling down the steps in my haste to escape. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, and finally got the engine started. The tires spun on the wet gravel as I sped away, not daring to look back. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town, the lights of civilization a welcome relief from the oppressive darkness of the mansion. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but there was no rational explanation. I told myself it was over, that I wouldn't go back to Wentworth House. But deep down, I knew that it wasn't over. Not really. That house had a hold on me, and no matter how hard I tried to forget, it would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next time I would be drawn back. I still hear the tapping sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the darkness presses in. It starts as a faint sound, barely noticeable, but it grows louder, more insistent, until I can't ignore it anymore. I don't know what the house wants from me, but I know that it's not finished, and as much as I try to fight it, I know that one day I'll go back. I'll return to that dark, decaying mansion at the edge of town, and I'll face whatever it is that haunts its walls. And when that day comes, I just hope I'll be strong enough to finally break free.